On a summer afternoon at Tokyo Airport, a Boeing 747 carrying over 50 people took off for Osaka. Everything seemed normal at the start of the flight, but a deadly issue hidden within the aircraft was about to cause one of the worst aviation disasters in history. The story takes place on August 12, 1985, in the sweltering heat of Tokyo. That day, most of Japan was under a thunderstorm, and Haneda Airport was bustling with people. Crowds were surging as people prepared to return home for the Obon holiday. At the boarding gate, Japan Airlines Flight NET-183 was ready to depart for Osaka. The entire flight would take just an hour. This route was one of the busiest in Japan, and at this moment, the plane was fully loaded with 509 passengers and 15 crew members, most of whom were families reuniting. For the flight crew, this journey was particularly important. In the left seat sat 39-year-old co-pilot Sasaki Yosuke. He was undergoing flight training Sakapta in candidate with a total flight time of 386 hours. This flight would be a crucial assessment B for his promotion. On the right side was 49-year-old Captain Takahashi Masami, a seasoned pilot flying since 1960, with a total of 12,400 hours off-flight experience. This time, Hanotanli had to supervise Sasaki's operations, Butalso Cerveasco, pilot and handler radio communications. The third crew member was 46-year-old flight engineer Fukuda Hiroshi, with a total of 9,831 hours off-flight time. He had already operated a flight in this aircraft earlier that day, and now Sasaki and Takahashi were taking over for the next segment. At 5:56 in the afternoon, the massive Boeing 740 was pushed back from Tegat. The oppressive heat and humidity, along with low-hanging storm clouds, prompted the pilot stop planner, Southern Overw at Toronto, to avoid the thunderstorms. At 6:12, the captain pushed the throttle forward and the enormous plane roared down the runway, accelerating for a few seconds before lifting off, carrying over 50 passengers into the ski above Tokyo Bay. The plane slowly turned right, heading towards Osaka. Passengers settled in, some chatting, while others gazed out the windows, admiring their seating cityscape. As the plane climbed, the pressurization system began to work, drawing in air from outside to maintain a breathable environment inside the cabin. This was a routine operation for every flight. At this moment, the Boeing 747, which had been in service for only a year and had completed over 18,000 cycles, seemed to be functioning normally. However, deep within the tail section, on the pressure bulkhead, lie wound from years ago, a few years back, the plane had experienced a hard landing in Osaka, causing severe impact to the tail structure. Yet, although maintenance personnel rated the use of incorrect procedures. Since then, every change in air pressure during flights had slowly torn at their repair, with tiny cracks gradually expanding. Now, as the plane ascended once more, this hidden danger finally reached a critical point. Japan Airlines Flight 123 ascended to 240 feet, flying over the Pacific Ocean. Everything in the cabin seemed normal. The flight engineer monitored the pressure indicators to ensure the passengers' comfort and safety. Just then, disaster suddenly struck. Their pressure bulkhead ruptured with all woodbang. The high-pressure air inside the cabin violently escaped, and the strong airflow tore apart the tail of the aircraft, destroying the vertical stabilizer, auxiliary power unit, and several critical hydraulic systems. The cabin immediately descended into chaos, filled with fear and screams throughout the plane. Violent air flows swept through the cabine, sucking all loose items towards the back. Ceiling panels were lifted, and debris was sucked into the air. Oxygen masks dropped from above. Passengers frantically grabbed and put them on. Some struggled desperately, while others' hands trembled. In the cockpit, the cabin altitude alarm sounded, indicating there was no longer breathable. The supervising captain immediately to sea, Dedo Preparato returned to Tokyo. Entered the international emergency code S70 on the transponder, and Doderedari turned toward turn. The plane then tilted violently, and the co-pilot was horrified to find the controls completely unresponsive. The flight engineer confirmed the worst-case scenario, hydraulic pressure was zero. This meant that all systems controlling the aircraft had completely failed. Without hydraulics, the plane was almost impossible to control. The three pilots were forced to become passe injures in the Boeing 74. Ground controllers immediately realized the severity of the situation. This was not an ordinary return flight attack completely out of control aircraft. Radar attempted to guide Flight 123 back to Haneda, but the Boeing 74 was violently shaking in the air, like a leaf caught in the wind. The plane was caught in a motion known as duck roll, swaying uncontrollably from side to side. At the same time, due to the loss of pitch control, the plane entered a state known as fugoidos oscillation. The Boeing 74 suddenly climbed, then rapidly lost speed, dubbed down, and then accelerated to climb again. Each swing meant a difference of several use in feet in altitude. The entire plane was like a runaway roller coaster. Flight attendants in the rear cabin riskerar running through the cabin to hand out sperma, stow the oxygen-deprived passengers. At this moment, a passenger captured the chaos in the cabino in camera. This photo later became a silent witness to tragedy. In the cockpit, the three pilots were fully focused on trying to control the plane, but forgot to wear their oxygen masks. The high-altitude hypoxia gradually blurred their consciousness, and their brains began to lose judgment. Ground calls went unanswered for a long time because the crew could only rely on instinct to perform the most basic actions. At this critical moment, the pilots discovered that the only thing still elusible was the engines. Although the control surface had failed, they could try to control the plane, pitch and direction, by adjusting the thrust differential. Thus began one of the most desperate struggles in aviation history. The three pilots clung to their last hope, trying to oust the four-engine store place, the flight control system. If only side had more thrust, the plane might be able to turn. If they adjusted the overall thrust, they might barely control the ascent and descent. The supervising captain struggled to maintain communication with the tower, but due to hypoxia, he could hardly concentrate. The flight engineer heard through the intercom that the cabin crew reported severatum to the tile and the collapse of the rear cap in, but the information was intermittent. The crew was so overloaded with tasks that it could hardly respond. At this time, the plane was still at 24,000 feet, with the oxygen in there only 1/3 of that at sea level. Their brains were deteriorating due to a lack of oxygen. At every moment when calm judgment is most needed, clarity is gradually fading. Air traffic control from Tokyo keeps scowling, but there is no response on the radio. Japan Airlines Flight 123 is now like a ghost in the sky, floating alone over Japan. Despite this, the pilots, with almost superhuman perseverance, managed to partially alleviate the severity by oscillations by adjusting the engine at thrust. The plane is still shaking, but amplitude has slightly decreased. In their despair, the crew sees a glimmer of hope. If they can maintain relative stability, there might still be chance to return to the airport. Air traffic control suggests to the crew diver to the nearest Nagoya airport, but the supervising airport insists on Reitu or Ningo Haneda because their runway, their longer and their SKU facilities are more comprehensive. A thought flashes through his mind. If they can land, it would be controlled crash, and just getting close to the runway itself would be miracle. The tension in the cockpit is extremely oppressive. The controller even allows them to communicate in Japanese to tease the pressure. Amidst this difficult struggle, the flight engineer remembers another method, using gravity to lower the landing gear without the hydraulic system. The captain hesitates for a moment, knowing this might disrupt the hard-won balance, but ultimately decides to take their risk. After adulthood, the landing gear drops and locks. Their dynamic effects are complex, with pitch oscillations slightly easing, but the Dutch roll becomes more severe. The pilots realize they cannot control own movement at a time, either stabilizing the pitch or reducing the roll, but not both simultaneously. Each maneuver exhausts their strength, but they finally manage to slowly turn the PL, in other words, Tokyo Sing engine thrust. However, when they reduce the throttle to try to buy lies the attitude, the Boeing 740 semi unexpectedly continues to RN, veering off course. Witnesses on the ground are shocked to see a 747 without a tail fin skimming the ski. As the plane descends, the oxygen concentration in the cabin anchor aces, and the three pilots gradually regain consciousness. They begin to think clearly again, but their reality before them is despairing. All hydraulic systems have completely failed, Ed. This is almost unprecedented in aviation story. Out of desperation, the pilots attempt to activate the backup electrical system, slowly deploying the golden wings. For a brief moment, the plane stabilizes, almost maintaining level flight. This is the first time during the entire disaster that the pilots feel they have regained a bit of control. The crew immediately contacts Tokyo Foreco and Troll report, stating they are about 5 miles northwest of Haneda. But this hope is short-lived. The wings begin to unfold unevenly, with the left wing rising and the right winger relatively decreasing, causing the planet to gradually fall into an uncontrollable tilt. The pilots desperately adjust the throttle, but it only makes time balance worse. At 9:47 local time, Exeter Air Traffic Control noticed the aircraft, descending to 470 feet, attempted to contact the crew and warned it of approaching terrain, but received no response. Seconds later, their radar signal completely disappeared. The plane continued to plummet towards the ground, with the crew still actively trying to core CT the attitude. The Dash 7 eventually crashed on the southern slope of Dartmoor, near the end of Falare of Ashburton, at an altitude of about 50 feet. The aircraft hit the ground nose down, with the left wing tilted, and immediately ignited alert fire. Most of the aircraft was destroyed by fire, and both pilots died instantly. Despite the wreckage being severely burned, investigators from the UK Air Accidents Investigation branch were able to piece together Earth incident using the surviving flight data recorder. Key findings showed that the aircraft was structurally intact before impact, with no mid-air disintegration. Engine number only was correctly shut down and defeathered, only to maintain a retracted state, rather than the test required 25 degrees. The autopilot remained engaged during this stall process, continuously trimming the nose up. The crew applied a symmetric thrust in the stalled state, directly leading to the uncontrolled crash. Medical examinations found no signs of physical impairment, drugs, or alcohol in the crew. Both held valid medical certificates. A crucial piece of evidence was missing from the investigation: the cockpit voice recorder. This device had failed long before, possibly damaged while the aircraft wastes Ervis in Egypt. Therefore, no voice data from the accident flight could be retrieved. Investigators could not confirm the communication or reactions of the pilots at critical moments. The investigation also mentioned a factor often overlooked but extremely important: the control aid after autopilot disengagement. After analyzing the accident, tests were conducted on a simulator, showing that duetto, the aircraft being heavy litterman nose up. Maintaining level flight after autopilot ice engagement required more than 38 pounds of control force. Coupled with the symmetric thrust produced by the three engines at low speed, the pilots faced an extremely difficult control situation. Notably, both pilots were advanced on age. Despite their rich experience and proper handling, their physical strength might not have been what it once was. This could have led to slightly delayed retirements. Regarding the manner of the fall, witnesses said the plane descended like a falling leaf. This suggests the aircraft may have entered a flat spin. The flight data recorder also showed an airspeed of only about 30 knots during the descent phase, supporting this judgment. However, the early violent left roll and 54-degree to attitude, combined with the pilot's full nose up input, indicate they may have experienced spatial disorientation in a spiral div or spin mixed state. Due to limited data, the truth is difficult to fully ascertain. Considering the pilot's extensive experience, some operations reflected in their recorders still seemed abnormal, leaving more questions than answers. The UK Air Accidents Investigation branch ultimately concluded that the accident resulted from a series of factors. The aircraft configuration was in Corey CDLE. The crew did not set the feather to 25 degrees, leading to a higher than expected stall speed and reduced deceleration margin. The autopilot system continuously trimmed then a up, causing the stall to occur earlier. The crew's response to the stall warning was delayed, failing to immediately disengage the autopilot to corrective action. During the stall, increasing the power of the three-engine SPR to see the symmetric thrust, causing the aircraft to enter an uncontrollable roll and yaw, ultimately leading to the crash.